Imagine the global economy as a massive supertanker, navigating treacherous waters. Suddenly, pirates are attacking its engine room, threatening to cut off its fuel supply. At the same time, the captain and crew are locked in a shouting match over who gets to steer and where the next course corrections should go, making the ship's path erratic and unpredictable. Investors are left wondering if the tanker will run aground or lose power entirely. Hello, this is WarmInsight. Today, we're going to talk about the escalating geopolitical volatility and domestic policy fractures that are driving systemic market uncertainty. Leaving a like and subscribing is a huge help to us. Right now, the global stage is defined by a precarious dance between major powers. The United States and Iran have reached a critical inflection point. We are seeing repeated exchanges of fire in the Strait of Hormuz. This is a narrow stretch of water, a choke point for roughly a fifth of global oil supply. When fire is traded here, the world holds its breath. Any sustained disruption sends crude oil prices soaring, which triggers an inflationary shock that vibrates through every single household on the planet. This is not just about the price at the pump. It is a systemic threat to trade and supply chains. Shipping insurers are hiking premiums. Rerouting ships is becoming a costly necessity. The peace plans being discussed are being labeled as unrealistic by officials. This suggests a deep chasm in expectations, making a genuine de-escalation difficult and prolonged uncertainty our new base case. To understand why this matters so much, we have to look at the historical parallel of the 1973 oil crisis. Back then, the world was caught off guard by the OPEC oil embargo. It was a moment where energy was used as a geopolitical weapon, much like the tensions we see today in the Strait of Hormuz. In 1973, the sudden tripling of oil prices did not just make driving expensive. It ended the post-World War II economic boom. It led to a decade of stagflation, where prices went up, but growth stayed flat. People stood in miles-long lines just to get a few gallons of gasoline. The stock market tumbled, and the psychological contract between the government and the citizen was broken. Today, we are looking at a similar setup. When a critical artery like the Strait of Hormuz is threatened, we aren't just looking at a line on a chart. We are looking at the potential for a structural shift in how the world functions. The 1973 crisis forced the West to realize that their entire lifestyle was built on a fragile foundation of cheap foreign energy. We are at that same crossroads again, where the illusion of stability is being stripped away by the reality of geography and conflict. From a psychological perspective, the reaction to these events is rooted in our primal fear of resource scarcity. Human beings are biologically wired to react violently to the threat of losing access to vital resources. This is known as the scarcity heuristic. When we hear about conflict in an oil-rich region, our brains do not process it as a complex geopolitical event. Instead, the amygdala, the part of the brain responsible for the fight or flight response, takes over. We perceive a threat to our basic survival. This leads to a collective anxiety that manifests in the markets as panic selling and irrational hoarding. We see this in the energy markets first, but it quickly spreads. This psychological root is why markets do not just move in a linear fashion. They move in explosive bursts of fear. We are seeing a global version of the panic that happens when a crowd thinks the exits are closing. This neurophilosophical drive to protect what is ours at any cost makes the market much more volatile than the actual physical disruption might suggest. To put this into a fifth-grade analogy, imagine the entire world is a big school cafeteria. Most of the kids get their lunch from a single, very narrow hallway, where the food carts come through. Now imagine two of the biggest, toughest kids in the school start having a food fight right in the middle of that hallway. Even if they aren't trying to hit you, you can't get your lunch. The hallway is blocked. Some kids start crying because they're hungry. Other kids start trying to steal food from their neighbors' trays because they're afraid there won't be any more lunch today. The school principal, who is supposed to stop the fight, is busy arguing with the teachers about what the new school rules should be, so nobody is actually stopping the fight in the hallway. That narrow hallway is the Strait of Hormuz. The lunch is the oil, and the kids panicking and stealing food are the investors, driving prices up and down in a frenzy. But the geopolitical fire is only half the story. While the world burns, the house is also crumbling from within. Domestic political fragmentation is eroding policy predictability. We are seeing bitter skirmishes over redistricting and fiscal policy. This internal discord is acting as a dual pressure point. It isn't just about who wins an election. It is about the loss of investor confidence in the system itself. When the rules of the game are constantly being rewritten or argued over, nobody wants to play. This political gridlock creates an environment where the government cannot respond effectively to external shocks. If the Strait of Hormuz closes, but the domestic government is shut down because of a budget fight, the crisis becomes an existential one. This domestic chaos has a historical parallel in the late Roman Republic. Before the fall of Rome, the empire didn't just collapse because of outside invaders. It collapsed because the internal political system became so fractured that it could no longer function. Politicians were more interested in their own power struggles, their own redistricting of influence, and their own fiscal ego than they were in the stability of the state. The constant infighting meant that when a real threat appeared at the borders, the Republic was too busy arguing with itself to mount a defense. This internal decay made the external pressure fatal. We are seeing a modern version of this. When internal political battles become more important than systemic stability, the foundation of the market begins to crack. Investors look at the gridlock and realize that the captain of the ship is too busy arguing with the navigator to notice the iceberg. The psychological root of this domestic fragmentation is found in tribalism and in group bias. We are naturally inclined to favor our own group and demonize the other. In a healthy political system, this is balanced by a shared sense of national purpose. However, when that balance shifts, we enter a state of hyperpolarization. Our brains begin to process political disagreements as personal attacks. This triggers a cognitive bias called the backfire effect, where presenting someone with evidence that contradicts their political beliefs actually makes them hold those beliefs even more strongly. This makes compromise impossible. In the context of fiscal policy and market regulation, this tribalism means that policies are no longer made based on economic reality, but on political survival. For an investor, this is the ultimate nightmare, because it means the future is no longer governed by logic, but by the unpredictable whims of a divided public. To understand this with a fifth-grade analogy, imagine you are on a long road trip with your family. Your parents are in the front seat. Suddenly, a huge storm starts and the road gets very slippery and dangerous. That's the geopolitical crisis. But instead of focusing on the road, your parents start screaming at each other about which radio station to listen to and who forgot to pack the snacks. They are so busy yelling and pointing fingers that they aren't even looking at the road. You're in the back seat and you're terrified, not just because of the storm, but because the people driving the car aren't paying attention to the danger. That's what it feels like for investors when they see domestic political gridlock during a global crisis. The people in charge are too busy fighting over small things to handle the big things. This leads us to the behavior of the herd. In times of heightened tension, the herd mentality takes over. Retail investors, driven by sensational headlines, react emotionally. They see the headline about fire in the Strait of Hormuz, and they sell everything. Or they see a spike in oil, and they chase the rally without understanding the underlying mechanics. This short-term focus is fueled by the availability heuristic. This is a cognitive bias, where we over-rely on recent, dramatic news to make decisions. Because the news is loud and scary, we think the danger is higher than it might be, or we think the outcome is certain when it is actually still up in the air. This causes widespread panic selling. People prioritize immediate loss avoidance over long-term strategic thinking. They see the herd running and they start running too, without ever stopping to ask where everyone is going. The historical parallel for this herd behavior can be seen in the 1929 market crash. Leading up to the crash, there was a massive amount of retail participation. People were investing based on tips and rumors rather than fundamentals. When the first signs of trouble appeared, the fear spread like a contagion. It wasn't the initial drop that killed the market. It was the absolute panic of the herd, trying to get out all at once. The infrastructure of the market couldn't handle it. The psychological weight of everyone selling at the same time created a self-fulfilling prophecy of doom. Today, with high-frequency trading and social media, the herd can stampede faster than ever before. A single tweet or a single video clip of a drone strike can trigger a billion-dollar sell-off in seconds. The speed of the herd has increased, but the intelligence of the herd has remained just as low as it was in 1929. The psychological root here is the social proof principle. We are evolved to look at what others are doing to determine what is safe. If you see 10 people running away from a dark alley, You don't walk into the alley to see what's there. You run with them. This served us well on the African savanna when we were avoiding lions. But it is a disaster in the stock market. In the market, if everyone is running away, that is usually the time when the greatest opportunities exist. But our brains are screaming at us to follow the group. This is compounded by the fear of missing out, or FOMO. We don't want to be the only ones left holding the bag. This creates a feedback loop of fear that can decouple the market from reality for weeks or months at a time. For a fifth-grade analogy, think of a movie theater. Someone in the front row thinks they smell smoke. They don't see fire, they just think they smell smoke. They stand up and start walking toward the exit. The person next to them sees them walking and gets nervous. So they stand up too. Within 30 seconds, everyone in the theater is screaming and pushing and shoving to get out the door. People get hurt in the crush at the exit, even though there was never actually a fire. The smell of smoke was just someone's burnt popcorn. That is how the herd reacts to geopolitical news. They don't wait to see if there is a real fire. They just see someone else running, and they decide to trample everyone else to get to the door first. In contrast to the herd, we have the smart money. These are the titans of the market. They view periods of extreme instability as opportunities. While the herd is reacting to headlines, sophisticated investors are analyzing the underlying fundamentals. They are identifying assets that are being unfairly punished by short-term panic. They are looking for businesses that have pricing power and robust cash flows, companies that can navigate both global conflict and internal political headwinds. They aren't looking at what will happen in the next 5 minutes. They are looking at where the world will be in 5 years. This involves a disciplined approach to hedging. They might take long positions in defense, contractors, or specific energy plays that thrive in high volatility environments. They recognize that political battles create temporary market inefficiencies that can be exploited. The historical parallel for this approach is the story of the Rothschild family. During the Napoleonic Wars, legend has it that Nathan Rothschild used a superior network of carrier pigeons to learn the outcome of the Battle of Waterloo before anyone else in London. While the rest of the market was panicking, believing that Napoleon might have won, Rothschild knew the truth. He used the panic to buy up the entire market at rock-bottom prices. Whether or not the story is 100% accurate, the principle remains. The smartest investors in history have always been those who could remain calm and analytical while everyone else was losing their minds. They didn't just survive the chaos. They used the chaos as a ladder to reach a new level of wealth. They understood that the end of the world is rarely as imminent. As the headlines suggest, the psychological root of the smart money's success is delayed gratification and the ability to override the amygdala. With the prefrontal cortex, this is the part of the brain responsible for logical reasoning and long-term planning. Smart money investors have trained themselves to recognize when they are feeling fear and to step back from it. They use a process called cognitive reappraisal. Instead of seeing a market drop as a threat, they reappraise it as a discount. This requires a high level of emotional intelligence and a deep understanding of one's own biases. It is the ability to be greedy when others are fearful and fearful when others are greedy. It is a fundamental rejection of the social proof principle. To use a fifth-grade analogy, imagine there is a big storm coming to your town. Everyone is panicking and running to the store to buy all the bread and milk. The shelves are empty, and people are fighting over the last loaf of bread. But there is one kid who realized a week ago that the storm might come. He didn't panic. Instead, he spent his allowance on extra batteries, flashlights, and umbrellas while they were still on sale and nobody wanted them. Now that the storm is here, he has everything he needs. He might even have a few extra umbrellas to sell to the people who were too busy panicking to prepare. He didn't follow the crowd to the bread aisle. He went where the crowd wasn't looking. So, how do we survive this? How do we navigate a world where the Strait of Hormuz is a flashpoint and our own capital is a battleground? The answer lies in survival mechanics. We must prioritize resilience and defensive positioning. This means increasing exposure to sectors like utilities and consumer staples. These are the things people need. Regardless of what is happening in the Middle East or in Washington, people still need to turn on the lights. They still need to buy soap and food. These sectors offer stable dividends and consistent demand. We also look at healthcare for its defensive characteristics. And of course, we look at energy and gold. Gold is the traditional safe haven, the asset that people flock to when they lose faith in paper currency and political systems. The historical parallel for this kind of defensive positioning can be found in the 1970s. During that decade of chaos, the investors who survived and even thrived were those who didn't chase the high-flying tech stocks of the previous era. Instead, they moved into hard assets. They bought gold, which went from $35 an ounce to over $800. They bought energy stocks that benefited from the rising price of oil. They focused on value and preservation. They realized that in a storm, you don't want a fast boat. You want a sturdy one? Those who stayed in the defensive sectors were able to protect their purchasing power, while the rest of the world saw their savings eaten away by inflation and market crashes. The psychological root of survival mechanics is loss aversion. Studies in behavioral economics show that the pain of losing $100 is twice as intense as the joy of gaining $100. By focusing on defensive assets, we are working with our psychology rather than against it. When we know our downside is protected, we are less likely to make emotional, panic-based decisions. We create a sense of security that allows our logical brain to stay in control. This is about wealth preservation. It is the understanding that you cannot win the game. If you are knocked out of the game, survival is the first step toward prosperity. For a fifth-grade analogy, imagine you are playing a game of tag on a very crowded playground. The ground is slippery, and there are lots of kids running around. If you try to run as fast as you can to catch everyone, you're probably going to slip and fall and hurt your knee. But if you play defensively, staying near the sturdy play structure, where you have good grip and can't be easily tagged, you stay in the game. You might not tag as many people right away, but you're still playing while the other kids are in the nurse's office with scraped knees. You are waiting for the playground to dry off before you start running fast again. One of the most powerful survival mechanics is dollar cost averaging. This is the practice of investing a fixed amount of money at regular intervals, no matter what the market is doing. In a volatile environment, this is your best friend. When the market is down, your fixed amount buys more shares. When the market is up, it buys fewer shares. Over time, this smooths out your entry price and removes the need to time the market. It takes the emotion out of the process. You don't have to worry about whether today is the right day to buy. You just stick to the plan. This is the ultimate tool for combating the herd mentality. And the availability heuristic, the historical parallel for dollar cost. Averaging is the concept of the generational bargain. Many of the greatest fortunes in history were not built by a single lucky trade. They were built by families and institutions that consistently added to their positions over decades through wars, depressions, and political upheavals. They viewed the market as a long-term savings vehicle rather than a casino. By constantly buying, they were able to capture the massive, upward trajectory of human progress, while ignoring the temporary dips and crashes that terrified everyone else. They understood that time in the market is much more important than timing the market. The psychological root of dollar cost averaging is the reduction of decision fatigue. Every time we have to make a choice about whether to buy or sell, we use up mental energy. In a crisis, our mental energy is already depleted by stress and fear. This leads to poor decision-making. By automating our investments, we remove the need to make a choice. We set a rule for ourselves and we follow it. This bypasses the emotional centers of the brain and relies on the disciplined, habit-forming parts of the brain. It turns investing into a routine, like brushing your teeth, rather than a high-stakes gamble. For a final fifth-grade analogy, imagine you are trying to fill up a big bucket with water from a hose, but the water pressure keeps changing. Sometimes it's a tiny trickle, and sometimes it's a huge blast that splashes everywhere. If you try to move the bucket around to catch the water, you're going to spill most of it. But if you just put the bucket down in one spot and leave the hose running, eventually the bucket will be full. You don't have to worry about the pressure changing. You just have to be patient and let the bucket fill up slowly. That is what dollar cost averaging does for your wealth. The current environment demands a disciplined, defensive posture. We are seeing a market sentiment that is heavily skewed toward fear. Geopolitical fault lines are deepening, and domestic policy is eroding. This is a time to prioritize resilience over aggressive growth. We must look at the global shield, maintaining a core allocation to the U.S. market because of its liquidity and innovation, but staying focused on the defensive sectors. International markets, especially emerging ones, are under too much pressure from the geopolitical flashpoints right now. We must be cautious.